My introduction will be very brief, and then I will turn it over to my co-conspirator, the Reverend Margaret Bullitt Jonas, who is the associate priest of Grace Episcopal Church and is one of the principal organizers of this event. In Romney's... This is turned up as loud as it is possible. Is that good? In Mitt Romney's acceptance speech a week ago, he uttered a couple of lines that have gotten, as far as I'm concerned, too little attention. He disparaged the Obama administration for caring about rising sea levels and the environment, and then he added with mock earnestness, "And I care about you." We have a guest tonight who will make it clear, utterly clear, that caring about people requires us, absolutely requires us, to care about rising sea levels and its cause, as well as the environment in general. Here with me tonight is Reverend Margaret Bullitt Jonas, as I said, Associate Priest of Grace Episcopal Church, to introduce this evening's program and speaker. Margaret?
Thank you all for being here tonight. I think you can hear me all right. Let me know if you can't hear. If gratitude is the wellspring of wisdom, then I must be a really wise person, because I'm feeling so grateful tonight that all of you are here, that Bill is here. I imagine this being possibly a turning point in the climate movement in this valley, and who knows, maybe in the country. So with a heart full of thanks, before I introduce Bill, I'd like to briefly thank the many people who contributed to this evening and who gave so generously of their time and insight and financial resources to make it possible. First, I'd like to thank the team of folks from Grace Episcopal Church and Emmanuel Lutheran Church, led by Ruth Renard, who worked for months to organize this lecture. You may know that the Emmanuel Grace Lecture Series is a brand new attempt to create a space in which people can gather to reflect in thoughtful and creative ways on the most significant issues of our time. And we figured that Bill McKibben pretty much fit the bill for a wonderful speaker, and we're delighted that he accepted our invitation to speak. I want to thank Amherst College for hosting us and for its extraordinary generosity and support. And I especially want to thank Jan Dezard, who gave so generously of his time tackling all kinds of issues. I want to thank the many sponsors who made contributions to 350.org, and they are listed on the back of the blue handout for those of you who did get a little blue handout. So a shout out to those generous folks who are supporting the vital work of 350.org as it works to build a worldwide movement to stabilize the climate. Thank you to our sponsors. I also want to thank any of you who might feel moved to make a donation of your own tonight, and there's some little baskets outside the door. All the monies received will go straight to 350.org. And I want to thank you all for coming, for just your presence and your participation here gives us all strength and hope as we move forward in the years ahead. I know that there are some municipal and political leaders with us here tonight, so I would like to recognize John Musante, who's the Amherst town manager, and also Stephanie O'Keefe. Thank you for being here tonight. She's the chair of the select board. And also John Olver's here. And I don't know, if there are any other municipal leaders or political leaders who would like to be recognized? Well, we all recognize each other. We're all important. There are signed copies of some of Bill McKibben's books available for sale in room 202, which is the room right across the hall from the chapel. It won't surprise any of you to know that news of Bill's coming just galvanized a great deal of energy across the region, giving us fresh energy and momentum to turn our attention to the climate issue. Immediately after the lecture tonight, there is going to be a rally that the students are holding in Frost Library at Amherst College as they work to propel forward a movement to urge colleges to divest from fossil fuel industries. So here's what we're going to do. Because we have a big overflow crowd, here's what Bill's requesting the way we handle it tonight. After his lecture, we're going to have question and answer for 10 or 15 minutes or so. And then Bill is going to go down to Stern Auditorium to take questions and answers from the folks down there who don't have a chance to be with us in this room. And he's inviting all of the rest of us who are here to walk over to the library and to join the students in that rally. So I invite you to consider doing that. Then tomorrow, the Sage Alliance is planning a flotilla and land rally as part of its campaign to close down the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant in Vermont. Some of you may want to participate in that. And on Sunday, a climate action conference has been pulled together in literally, I'm not kidding, 6 weeks. We've pulled together a climate action conference with all kinds of great workshops. It will be held from 1 to 5 in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon at First Church Congregational here in Amherst, with all kinds of workshops giving us different ways to get involved. So I invite you to consider coming. So I'd like to say a few words of introduction for Bill McKibben, whom I consider him one of the great prophets of our time, and he's someone I pray for every day. He is the author of a dozen books about the environment. I expect many of us here have read his now classic book, The End of Nature, which was published in 1989 after being serialized in The New Yorker, and it's hailed as the first book for a general audience about climate change. It's been printed in more than 20 languages. We think of Bill as a journalist, as an author, as a scholar, but especially we think of him as an environmental activist. I first met Bill in 2001 at a rain-soaked march in Lynn to protest the auto industry's promotion of gas-guzzling SUVs. And in the years since then, our paths have crossed in various climate actions. You know that several years ago, Bill founded 350.org, which is the world's largest grassroots climate campaign with activists, I understand, in every single country except North Korea. Is that right? Still working on North Korea. And I'm told that since 2009, 350.org has coordinated more than 15,000 rallies in 189 countries. And I know that a lot of folks in this room have participated in local rallies that we organized and held in solidarity with 350.org. I treasure Bill's clarity, his courage, his imagination, and I appreciate his awareness that religious communities have a crucial role to play in awakening the American public to the climate crisis. And I think people of faith, we have a lot more work to do. Church leaders have a long history of engagement in social movements, and I'm thinking of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church that opposed Nazi Germany. I think of religious leaders like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who fought the tyranny of apartheid in South Africa. I think of the clergy and congregations in the United States who rose up against slavery, child labor, and unjust war, and who advocated for a woman's right to vote, and for civil rights, and for marriage equality. Spiritual and moral leadership is required in our own time as we face the reality of a rapidly changing global climate. So, before I give the mic to Bill, I want to ask two things. First, I want to ask you please to turn off your cell phones and your pagers so that we can listen with full attention. And second, because Bill is leading a worldwide movement to save life as we know it on this planet, we need to do what social justice movements have always done. and what liberation movements have always done, and that is to sing. You got it, it's to sing. So the planning committee invited two people to join us tonight to lead us in song. The Reverend Andrea Vazian, pastor of Haydenville Congregational Church, and the Reverend Kate Stevens, pastor of First Congregational Church in Ashfield. And Andrea and Kate are two dear friends of mine. They have been leaders with me in the group Religious Witness for the Earth for a good many years. It's a group, Religious Witness for the Earth, on which Bill serves on our advisory board. And the song we're going to sing is a song that Bill has sung with us several times already. Most recently, I think, in 2007, when Religious Witness for the Earth organized the Interfaith Walk for Climate Rescue. And you may remember, some of you may in this room have participated in it. We walked 100 miles from Northampton into downtown Boston, and Bill came to Northampton to speak at the kickoff service, and we sang this song. So here's how it goes. It's called "We Are Saving Noah's Cargo," and it is sung to the tune of "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder." And to open it up to people of all faiths or of no faiths, we've changed the line "Children of the Lord" to "Children of the Earth." And the words, I want to give credit for the words. They are the words of Reverend Fred Small, who's one of the founders of Religious Witness for the Earth. So here we go.
Great. So if you don't know this song immediately, you will soon. So sing with us. This is not a little duet. So sing with us and we welcome all harmonies. Little Keith Sister says, a harmony is any note your neighbor is not singing.
That was magnificent. Please, please. No. Thank you all so much. It is so good. It is so good to be here with you. Thank you all so much for being here. I feel as well, more than usual, unequal. I'll do my best to you. I'll sort of squat down a little bit so I'm a little closer. I feel unequal to the reception you've given me. You know, I feel especially abashed to be turning my back to Congressman Oliver, who spent the last 4 nights in Charlotte, North Carolina, surrounded by sort of honest-to-God orators, you know. So I hope you're not expecting any, you know, Michelle Obama sort of stuff here tonight. I will do my best, and I will make up in a little bit anyway for my lack of eloquence by doing what we can to turn this into a working meeting as much as a talking meeting, because we've got an awful lot of work to do. You know, I'm so cognizant of the fact that Margaret and Kate and Andrea and so many of the other people here we've been fighting this for a long time. And we've been losing this fight for a long time and losing it badly, and we have to bring that to an end. We have a short time to turn this around, and in this part of the world, that really starts tonight. Now, you're going to have to be a little bit the kind of guinea pigs for this talk that I'm going to give tonight. I'm set out last night. I've been home for a few weeks in Vermont, which was a rare luxury, with my wife, who's here someplace. And I won't be really home again until mid-December, because we're getting ready to really launch this full-on effort around divestment. And following the lead of people already here, and so I want to try talking about it tonight, but I don't know yet all the words in which to talk about it. So I'll be looking for them here and looking for your help, and then I am going to walk across the quad and try to get that same help from the people who are down in this other room listening. And I'm sorry there's not enough room for us all to be in one place, but we really need your help. This is a big, beautiful, joyous welcome, and whenever it happens, I'm reminded that one of my roles in life is to be a professional bummer-outer of people, and I really apologize for that. But I'm going to talk about that for a minute, about what's going on, because it's important to understand exactly what's going on and on what scale, in order to understand both the scale and the pace of the response that we need. Because that scale and pace of the response that we need is sadly different from what it was 20 years ago. Had we started work on this 20 years ago in some serious way, then we'd be a long ways towards solving the problem now, but we're not, and it's gotten much, much worse. How to begin? There was a headline this morning in one of the papers that I read this morning, with new data from the Arctic, and it said, the headline was, half the polar ice cap is missing. That's about as scary a headline as you're likely to read. The amount of sea ice in the Arctic, as many of you know, has been plummeting all summer, and about a week ago set a new record, and it's continued to fall in a kind of free fall. There's half as much ice now in area and about a quarter as much in volume as there was, say, when Neil Armstrong looked down on this earth from the moon. And that was within my lifetime and within the lifetime of few other people in this room. And that's a pretty amazing thing to contemplate, that we've been able to enact change on that kind of scale already. The ocean is about 30% more acid than it was. If you stick a pH strip in, it comes out a different color than it would have 40 years ago. In this part of the world, one of the things we notice most is what changes in the atmosphere. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold. That means that the atmosphere of this Earth is about 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago. That is a staggering change in a basic physical parameter of this Earth. And what it does is load the dice for drought and for flood. There's more evaporation up into that atmosphere, and once that water is up, water vapor only stays the average molecule in the atmosphere about 7 days before it comes back to Earth. And increasingly, it comes back to Earth in deluge, in downpour. And of course, we've gotten to see all these things much too up close in the last few years. They're not just happening in faraway places to poor people. They're happening all around us. Vermont, where I live, and parts of western Massachusetts, got that unearthly hit from Irene about this time last year. Now that storm came up the East Coast, and when it went over the ocean off New York and New Jersey, the sea surface temperature was at record high, and so it could soak up all kinds of moisture and then drop it. Drop more moisture than we've seen before, and more than we can deal with. The governor of Vermont, Peter Shumlin, said the next morning on the radio, it was on Democracy Now!, the two of us were on the TV together. And he said, you know what, I didn't run to be governor of a tropical country. But that's what's starting to happen. You know what happened in Vermont the day before yesterday? We had the first death in the history of the state from eastern equine encephalitis. Now, I went back and looked because I thought I remembered this, and indeed, I found a report from about 4 years ago from Vermont Public Interest Research Group about what the consequences of climate change would be in Vermont. And one of the experts that they interviewed said, expect cases of eastern equine encephalitis to be breaking out across the state because the mosquito that carries it is, well, mosquitoes in general love the warm, wet world that we are building on their behalf. If you were looking at our planet from outer space through some telescope trying to figure out what on earth we were doing altering our atmosphere, a reasonable conclusion would be that we had embarked on some kind of mosquito ranching enterprise, and this was the most efficient way to carry it out. And that means around the rest of the world that the incidence of dengue fever is up 200% around Asia and South America in the last decade. I got dengue in Bangladesh. I was as sick as I've ever been, but I didn't die because I was strong and healthy going in. A lot of people did die, and I remember being in the clinic and looking at them and thinking, damn, this is so unfair. The 150 million people who live in Bangladesh, the UN tries to measure how much carbon each country emits on the fanciful thought that someday we might want to do something about it. And you cannot even get a number, really, for those they're a rounding error in the calculations because they're not driving cars and most aren't connected to the electric grid. And, of course, the 4% of us who live in this country have been using coal and gas and oil for a long time. And so something above a quarter of the greenhouse gases currently in the atmosphere came from us. And that imposes on us both a practical and a moral duty to do something about it. One that grows all the time as we see what happens. Look at this drought that we have seen this summer. It's not that we've never had droughts before. There have always been heat waves and droughts. But as Jim Hansen at NASA, our most important climatologist, said in a remarkable paper that came out about 6 weeks ago, if you look at the change in temperature, if you plot the bell curve of temperatures, the possibilities 50 years ago of an anomalous heat wave of the kind we saw this summer were about 1/2 of, they'd at any given moment be covering about 1/2 of 1% of the Earth's surface, and now they're likely to be covering about 10% at any given time, okay? Even the 1 degree of temperature that we've increased the global average has been enough to move us in that direction. And there's nothing abstract about it. The price of corn and soybeans has gone up 60% in the course of this summer on global markets. Now for us, that's, it's noticeable, but it's not horrible. I mean, if you buy a box of cornflakes, you pay more for the box than you do for the corn, okay? So it's not gonna starve any of us, but if you get up in the morning and you go to the marketplace and try to find enough coins to get cornmeal for your family to make tortillas with that night, believe me, a 60% increase in the price of corn is a big deal. It's the biggest possible deal that there is. There are a lot of people tonight not eating as much as they would like because they can't afford it. And it's not just here. We've had wicked drought this summer in Russia, one of the other big grain growing areas of the world, and across much of parts of Europe. Mexico is enduring a drought that's turning much of the country into desert. Food production down 70% across much of Mexico. It's astonishing to watch it happen. It's astonishing to watch it happen, and it's even more astonishing to recollect what the same scientists who told us that this would happen tell us about the future. We've raised the temperature 1 degree so far, and that's been enough to melt the Arctic. What they tell us with confidence is that unless we get our act together very quickly, unless we get off coal and gas and oil far more quickly than any government plans to at the moment, that we'll see the temperature rise 4 or 5 degrees in this before the kids who are at Amherst right now, and Smith and Mount Holyoke and Hampshire and UMass and every place else, before they're out of school, A team of agronomists at Stanford and the University of Washington last year, 2 years ago, did a series of studies where all they did was look at what happens to grain yields as the temperature rises. Forget about drought and flood, which make it hard to grow grain. Just look at the temperature. Because, of course, corn and rice and wheat and soybeans all evolved in the Holocene just like we did, And they're not adept. I mean, they're maybe even more, they have roots, okay? They can't move even the way we can. What they found was from this point on, each degree increase in global average temperature should cut grain yields about 10%. And you saw how that's possible this summer in the Midwest, okay? Try to imagine a planet with 20 or 30% fewer calories on it than we have now. Try to imagine what that means for war and peace, for development, for human rights, for women's rights, for all the things that we care about. It's not a workable world, and we must prevent it from happening. And our window for preventing it from happening is slim and closing. Okay? And that's what I want to talk about tonight. How we're going to do something about this. And I talk about it without any guarantee that I have the answer. We don't know. I mean, building movements and things is difficult and somewhat, it's really more of an art than a science. But I'll tell you a tiny bit about the work we've done the last few years just to give you a sense and to thank all of you who've been part of it. And to hope that all the rest of you will join in. I think that our friends from 350.org here out in this part of the world are passing around clipboards. Vanessa, is that right at the moment? Are they making their way around? Sign up. so that we know who you are and so that we can enlist you in this work. 350.org started 4 years ago in January of 2008. And at the time, it was the ludicrous work of myself and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I hang out. So exactly the same kind of kids that y'all are, okay? Demographically, just identical. They were seniors, so they weren't done with school, but they were pretty much done with school, if you know what I mean. And we decided we wanted to go to work. And so our first job was to find a name. And I called Jim Hansen at NASA and said, look, we need to know what the number is. How much carbon in the atmosphere is too much? He said, you know, I've been kind of wondering that myself. Let me put my team to work. And a few weeks later, he called back and said, it's not a good number, really. They published the paper in January of 2008, and it said 350 parts per million CO2 is the most you could have in the atmosphere if you wanted a planet similar to the one on which civilization evolved and to which life on Earth is adapted. Okay, now that is strong language for scientists to use, and it's much stronger when you know that outside today, here in Massachusetts and in Mongolia and every other place on Earth, it's 395 parts per million CO2 and rising 2 parts per million per year. Okay? We're too high already, which is why the Midwest burns and, you know, Pakistan floods and so on and so forth. So it was a depressing paper to read. But it did give us the one thing we thought we needed, which was a number. And the reason we wanted a number was because we were going to organize globally. And people on this planet have the difficult habit of speaking in their own languages. And this makes communication difficult, but the one thing that gets successful, well, maybe the 2 things, are musical notation and Arabic numerals, okay? And so 350 means the same thing everywhere, and it meant too much everywhere, and people understood that, and so we set to work. There were 7 young people, and there are 7 continents, so each one of them took one. The guy who took the Antarctic also had to take the internet, you know, it's sort of its own land mass, and off we set to do our work, and our work was to find people like ourselves. And the first task we set was to have a sort of big educational campaign, because a lot of places around the world, including a lot of places around this country, people hadn't heard that much about this. So we set to work, and the first task was to organize this big global day of action, and we asked people all over the country, all over the world, would you do something on this day in October? And all over the world and all over Pioneer Valley, people answered that call, and I know there are people in this room who helped a lot. That first day was, well, we got the sense that it might work 2 days early. Okay, we were sitting around our little office that we'd borrowed for a week in Lower Manhattan, all of us in one room with our laptops open around a table, and the satellite phone rang, and it was our organizer in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, who, like many of our organizers, was a volunteer, and she was 17 years old, and she was in tears. They said the government took away our permit for Saturday, so we can't organize, do a thing on Saturday we're going to do. So we're doing it today before they can stop us, okay? Which was brave of her to begin with. But the reason that she was in tears was she just kept saying, we wanted to do this the same time as everybody else. We don't want to spoil it for everybody else. We're so sorry. And we have 15,000 kids right now out in the street in Addis Ababa. So I was like, Lily, don't worry about the date. It's really okay. And after that, you know, for the next 48, 72 hours, these pictures just flowed in from every corner, and you can go look at them. I mean, the next one came from U.S. troops in Afghanistan who had made a big 350 out of sandbags and sent us a note saying we're parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking, you know, and they came from every corner of the earth. Before it was done, there'd been 5,200 of these in 191 countries or something. CNN said it was the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. And it was very beautiful. And if you go look at those pictures, one of the things I'd like you to see when you see them and to understand is who your brothers and sisters in this fight are. I had heard much of my life that environmentalism was something that kind of rich white people did who didn't have other things to worry about, and that if you worried where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be involved, and so on and so forth. It turns out, not surprisingly, that most of the people we work with around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what the world is made up of. And what do you know? They're as concerned about the future as anybody else, maybe more so, because the future bears down even harder on you if you're in those categories and in those places right now. So it was stirring to see. And we've kept doing that because that education's really important. We've done 4 now, I guess, of these huge days. The last and most moving was last spring, and we called it Connect the Dots. And there again, there are people here who help, but it was people all around the world who had already felt the sting of climate change and who gathered in those places to, people in whose towns and communities had been burnt out by wildfire or swallowed by flood or drought was, and the pictures were just coming in, just from the most remote rural village. There's a picture from a rural village in India, and just a few scrawny dogs and a bunch of beautiful children and their mothers. And the note that came with it just said, "There is no water anymore behind our dam." And you read that, and you don't know what to do except try to fight some. And so that's what we've been trying to do now. Having built that movement, or some of it, the question is how we put it to use and what we're going to do and how we're going to stand up. And many of you helped last year when we started this fight against this pipeline down from the tar sands of Canada, the Keystone Pipeline. I have a feeling there's people in this room who went down to Washington and took part in those demonstrations or got arrested. If there are, would you guys just stand up for a moment so others can see you? I had a feeling there might be. Now, we went down there because that pipeline was super important, is super important. Those tar sands of Canada are the second biggest pool of carbon on Earth. The NASA team calculated that if you burned all the recoverable oil up there, it would be more than all the carbon that we have burned so far as a civilization, okay? You would immediately, if you could burn it all tonight, you'd add about 150 parts per million to that 395 figure. It's astonishing, its size. So we went there because it's really important to block that. And for the moment, in a great surprise to everybody in Washington, we actually kind of managed to slow it down anyway. No guarantee how it's going to turn out. Mitt Romney said that it would be his first act in office would be to approve this pipeline. And even in an Obama administration, there's no guarantee, none at all, The oil industry wants it more badly than they want anything else, and they spend freely, okay? But it was a very encouraging sign about the ability of people to stand up to the richest, most powerful industry on Earth. And in that sense, it was kind of a test a little bit. The trouble is, of course, that we can't really stop global warming one pipeline at a time, one coal mine at a time, one oil well at a time. There just are too many of them. I said to someone earlier this evening, it's like you'd be the little Dutch boy, but you'd need 5,000 fingers. We can't do it alone that way. So important as all those fights are, the fight against fracking and the fight against mountaintop removal and so on, we're going to have to figure out how to go more directly at the fossil fuel industry. And that's where we're headed next, and that's where we're going to need your help next. I wrote a piece this summer for Rolling Stone magazine, and the piece went unexpectedly viral. Despite the fact that it's kind of long and dense with numbers and things, it got viewed about 3 million times and was the most shared piece in the, I think, in the magazine's history, okay? And what it tried to lay out, and what the argument I want to try to lay out for you for just a minute is really the underlying logic of where we are. It took 3 numbers. The first was 2 degrees Celsius, okay? Now, I told you before we've already raised the temperature 1 degree, and that's been ruinous. It's too much already. But we've done it, and that's water under the bridge, as it were. The one thing that the world community has been able to agree on about climate change is that 2 degrees would mark a disaster line. Okay? The only thing, when people went to Copenhagen, to that complete failure of a meeting, UN summit that did nothing to solve our problem, the only thing that they agreed on in the final 1-page communique that they managed to put out was that 2 degrees would be too much. And the G8 has signed off on this, and the G20, and you know, the most conservative, the United Arab Emirates, and China, and even the United States has agreed that 2 degrees would be too much. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, second number, 565 gigatons of carbon. That's how much about, the scientists tell us, we can burn between now and 2050 and have some chance of staying below that 2 degrees, which, remember, isn't a very good place to be. And the 565 gigatons is no guarantee. It only gives us about an 80% chance of staying below, so less than your odds in Russian roulette. But still, okay, it's a number. The third number, the final number, the scary number, the new number, came from a team of financial analysts in the UK who did the job of adding up how much carbon the world's fossil fuel companies and the countries that operate like fossil fuel companies, think Venezuela, Kuwait, how much carbon they already have in their reserves ready to go. And that number is 2,795 gigatons, or 5 times more. Okay, so think of it, maybe to use a, since I live in a college town, here's an analogy, okay? We know what the legal drinking and driving limit is, okay? It's 0.8, right? It's not a good idea to go, but you can, you know, that's what we've agreed is the limit, and so on. And we know roughly how much, given your weight, you might be able over the course of an evening to drink a 6-pack of beer, and if you pace yourself and eat well and whatever, you might get away with, you might not, and it's not a wise thing to do, and I wouldn't recommend it, but the fossil fuel industry has open on the table ready to pour like 3 cases of beer, okay? That's their plan. That's their plan to, you know, total and waste and pollute and wreck and trash the planet around us. Those numbers make it clear that our understanding of climate change was a little off. Okay? We've spent a lot of time kind of berating ourselves for not solving this problem, and worrying an awful lot about our own carbon footprints and things. And that's appropriate. We should do that. And we all can do better and are working on doing better, you know. And colleges like this one, like all the colleges in this valley, are doing really some pretty cool things. I was at UMass last year, and I was the most impressive thing. That local food initiative there was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, you know. Just wonderful to see on that scale. But this is not how we're going to solve climate change. You can't make the math work fast enough for this to be the only thing that we do. Important as it is to be making changes in our communities, and we're so glad that towns like Amherst are working hard to do these things, in the current sort of structural setup, it's not going to be enough and in time. we're going to have to change that structural setup. Above all, we're going to have to do the most important thing we could do, which is demand finally that the fossil fuel industry pay a price for the carbon that it pours into the atmosphere. They have the greatest special break that any industry ever had. They are allowed to pour out their waste for free. Nobody else gets to do that in a civilization. You know, if you live in Amherst, I imagine you're not allowed to just take your trash and go toss it out in the street at the end. Is that correct? Amherst has, is again that kind of thing? That's good. That's sort of how we define civilizations, you know. We clean up after ourselves. Where I live, we pay $4 for a bag of trash when we put it out, okay? And that works out to like $160 or $170 a ton, you know, for the trash. Well, Exxon uses the atmosphere as an open sewer for its carbon for free. And that's why it is so hard for sun and wind and all the things that we need to get the kind of foothold that it's not a technological issue at this point. There were days last month when the country of Germany, the only country, that big country that's really seriously gone after this, there were days when it generated more than half the power it used from solar panels within its borders, okay? And what that demonstrates is that we do not lack technology. We lack political will to put technology to use. Okay? And that is where we must now begin. Kann's where we have to start turning the tide of this battle. The CEO, maybe one way to say it is, those numbers make clear that this is not just a problem that we've encountered, global warming, it's crime. And like most crimes, it has perpetrators. And they include the fossil fuel industry, the richest industry on Earth. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money, okay? Who are warping our democracy and who warp the politics of every country on Earth in order to make sure that they never have to pay for what they're doing. The president, the CEO of Exxon, Rex Tillerson, said earlier this summer in a speech, he said, you know what, it's true. Forget those things that my predecessors have always said. Global warming, in fact, is real, okay? And I think he expected everyone to say, oh, what a good fellow you are to admit that, you know? And I suppose in some sense he was. But then he said, but it's an engineering problem and it will have engineering solutions. And someone said, what do you mean? What kind of? He said, well, if we need to move our crop production areas, we will, okay? Which, by crop production areas, I believe he means what normal human beings refer to as farms. And if you look at an atlas of the world, there is no place to move them. If it gets too hot to grow corn in Iowa, like it did this summer, you cannot just shift the whole operation up to the melting tundra and grow it there. There's no soil, you know, it doesn't work. And it's not, in other words, an engineering problem, it's a greed problem. And it turns out a deeply moral issue, deeply moral in so many ways, climate change. Deeply moral in the fact that the poorest people on Earth who've done the least to contribute to it are suffering the most, but deeply moral, too, in the fact that every future generation and all the rest of creation that people sang about so beautifully at the beginning are being endangered so that a tiny, and I mean tiny, 1% of the 1% coterie of people can continue to make more money than any humans have ever made. The good news from that is that we're in the position to do at least a little something about that. Okay? Because of the size and power of the fossil fuel industry. It means that every institution of any size tends to have some money invested in it. I would not be surprised if Amherst College, in its endowment, in its portfolio, had some money that was invested in the fossil fuel industry. I would not be surprised if the churches, the denominations represented up here, have in their pension funds and things some investments in those industries. Which means that in some certain sense, all of us are participating in that. And it means that all of us have the power to say we do not any longer want to participate in that. It is time for it to stop. Now, this is not an easy thing to do, okay? To divest, to persuade institutions to divest their holdings because it is difficult and cumbersome, and it may exact, though not necessarily, some small economic penalty, along the way. It only is a tactic that we probably should use in fairly rare occasions. My friend Naomi Klein, who's been helping me scope this out all summer, and who's going to be on this road show when we do it, so it'll be much better than what I'm doing tonight. She said, it's always important to remember that, there's plenty of businesses, many businesses in the course of things occasionally do bad things, and we need to call them on it and pressure them, if they're paying low wages to Chinese workers, then we need to figure out how to make that stop, and put pressure on them and things. But the fossil fuel industry is unique in that it's not some small flaw in their business plan that's doing damage. It is their business plan, okay? This is what they do. And hence they need to be singled out in this way. The last time this was successfully done was a generation ago. And it was about companies that did business in apartheid South Africa. And there are people in this room who fought to bring an end to that. And it was hard work. And it meant all kinds of teach-ins and seminars. And it meant in many cases, people marching and demonstrating and sitting in front of dean's offices and at boards of trustees and, all those kind of things, but it was worth it. When Nelson Mandela got out of prison on Robben Island, one of the first trips that he took was to the United States, and the very first places he went were some of the college campuses where this battle had been fought and won. And he said, we liberated ourselves in South Africa, but we could not have done it without the help of people like you around this world. That's the situation we're in right now. This is the same scale of trouble. And it demands the same kind of response. And I'm in an optimistic mood about it a little bit. I went to lunch at Hampshire College today, which was the first school in the country to divest its stock in apartheid South Africa. And there was a member of the faculty there who was sits on the board of trustees on their investment committee, and he said at their next meeting he would introduce a resolution to make sure that they were divested of any holdings in fossil fuel. So that means, guys, that the race is on, okay? So, UMass and Smith and Holyoke and Amherst, you guys better get moving. And it was very good to walk in the door and see the Smith contingent, hard at work on this. And it'll be really good to walk out this evening to this rally at, where is it happening? Frost Library. That's I got to say, that's particularly a good place. My town in Vermont is the town where Robert Frost spent his summers. In fact, we built our house on land Frost once owned. And when we did the way we kicked off this work, the kind of precursor to that march across Massachusetts was the one we did across Vermont, and we left from Frost's old riding cabin, because one needs, a certain number of patron saints, of this kind of work, and Frost is a good one. So it'll be good to go there, and I hope many of you, not just students, will join in this fight and be over there this afternoon or this evening. Look, all of us have memberships of some kind in these various sorts of organizations. We are alumni, or we are professors and faculty, or we sit in the pews of these churches, or whatever it is, and we need to say in our names, you can't do this anymore. It's got to stop. We understand that it is difficult. We understand that it does not come for free, but we also understand that it makes no sense to pay for our education with investments that guarantee we will not have a planet to carry out that education on. It makes no sense to invest our pension funds in investments that guarantee there will not be a planet to retire on, It makes no sense to take the church's money and the synagogue's money and put them at work in companies that are busily running Genesis in reverse, that are decreating this planet that we find ourselves on. Now let me tell you, since there are people across a wide range of ages here, let me tell you just two things about that civil disobedience that some of these people helped in, about this Keystone stuff last summer. Because like I say, it was a learning experience, certainly for me. We sent out the letter asking people to come to Washington and get arrested. Naomi and Wendell Berry and I and a few other people, some indigenous leaders, sent it out. And we had no idea what to expect. As it turns out, more people came than we had anticipated, or indeed the police had anticipated. They're pretty good at dealing with 2 or 3 people at a time, but on the very first day of this 2-week thing, there were more than 80 of us there to get arrested, and that worried them a little bit. So they said, we're going to try to make an example of you, and they charged us with failure to yield, which isn't even a misdemeanor, it's a traffic offense, but nonetheless, we got to spend 3 days in Central Cell Block in D.C., which is just about as much fun as it sounds like it would be. And but the best, I'm glad I was there for no other reason than the guy next to me in the cell next to me was an old friend of mine, a guy named Gus Speth, now in his 70s, who had been one of the founders of the NRDC, and had been the first chair of the President's Council on Environmental Quality and run the entire United Nations Development Program, and then had been dean at Yale, and had done, in other words, every establishment right-thinking thing that one was supposed to do. All the things that should have solved this problem, were it a real normal political problem and not an exercise in the abuse of power by the fossil fuel industry. He had done all the right things and then had reached the conclusion that all those things were not working. An easy conclusion to reach when the polar ice cap is now half gone, okay? And so he was able to smuggle a note out to reporters from jail. And it was just 1 sentence long, and all it said was, I have held many important positions in this town, but none of them seem as important as the one I'm in right now, okay? So I know that there are lots of students and people here who are planning to go do great things in the world and will do great things in the world. And that there are lots of great writers and thinkers and professors here and things. And all of us, I got to say, I felt the same way. That the most useful thing I'd done in a very long time was just go off to jail. There are days when that may be what you have to do to get this done. Here were the 2 things that were good about that. One was, we told her, I was clear that I didn't think it was fair that college kids be the cannon fodder for this operation, okay? Because right now, if you're 22, really an arrest record is not the thing maybe most useful on your resume, okay? It probably, if if you sit in at the dean's office, it won't be the end of the world, but getting arrested down there, one of the few things that's really quite good about growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, And, and so it was with some pleasure that I watched the parade of the sort of, there were a number of follicularly challenged people like myself and, appearing there in D.C. We did not ask people, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But we did cleverly say, who was president when you were born? Okay. And the two biggest cohorts had been born in the FDR and the Truman administrations. Okay? So, young people, know that your elders are starting to step up and do the right thing. Young people have been leading this movement, and that's appropriate because, you're going to have to spend another 60 years on this planet. It behooves you to make sure it's in some kind of shape, okay? But feel good about the fact that older people are joining in this fight, that some of those people who sort of came of age in the 60s and whose first acts of their life were pretty cool, and then maybe settled into a sort of somewhat self-involved and consumerist second act, are finding that there's space for a real comeback in the third act, and that's good to see. Now, the second thing that was special, but very ironic for me, because I'm about as dressed up as I ever get, we told people, if you want to come get arrested, would you please put on a necktie or wear a dress? And I actually recommend thinking about that when you're doing things here, because we wanted to make a visual point, and that visual point is an important one. There is nothing radical about what we're asking for. Okay. We want the world to work sort of like the one we were born on to, which, if you think about it in some ways, is a kind of conservative demand, In a certain way, there's nothing, I think, radical about what the Occupy movement was asking for. It's sort of, we'd like the world to work a little bit like it said it would in our civics textbooks, not the kind of rigged game that it has turned into, Radicals work at oil companies. If you are willing to get up every day, and in order to acquire a fortune, you are willing to alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere, then you are engaged in an act more radical than any human beings have engaged in before you. That radicalism has to be brought to heel. We can't let it go on any longer. The consequences will be felt in geologic time. And so that's why it's so important that we try anyway to do this work with no particular guarantee of success. I can't tell you exactly how this divestment movement leads precisely to a sort of A, B, and C set of outcomes, any more than one knew precisely how, in the case of South Africa, it would. But the work of raising consciousness and of putting pressure and of helping people understand who is behind the trouble that we see, that's powerful work. And at the very least should serve to soften up these guys a little bit so that in Washington there's some possibility someday for people like Congressman Oliver to be able to do some of the work that has been blocked for so long. No guarantees, none at all. Only one, really, because I've been all over the world, spewing carbon behind me for the last 4 years, okay? I've been to almost everywhere, and I know in all those places, tonight and every night now, there are people meeting in rooms like this with the same feeling in their hearts about needing, wanting to do something, and this movement is growing and growing fast, and it's on the same page, and it's coordinating, and so many of those people are doing it despite the fact that they've never caused any of this problem at all, It's always an honor to be in those rooms with those people. And it is an extraordinary honor to be here with you guys tonight, because I have no doubt that this little valley will be the seedbed of this particular revolution. And I have no doubt that you guys are up to the challenge. And I so look forward just to standing shoulder to shoulder with you. Thank you all so much.